Well, thank you again for coming this evening. I'm delighted at the turnout and for your attention. And I'm really excited about the question that was posed to the panelists last time because it's a perfect segue into the topic of this panel, which is basically where do we go from here? What kind of actions can we take as a campus, as a community, as individuals that live in this country in order to kind of meet and address the injustices that are happening around us all the time. We have a great set of panelists here. Lisa Graybill will go first. Lisa and I met like a couple months ago at a coffee shop and had a great conversation about this topic. She's currently a lecturer in the legal externships program at DU. And before that, she was the legal director of the ACLU of Texas from 2005 to 2012. So she's got a lot of experience dealing on the ground with this issue. Next, we'll have Cynthia Rodriguez, who was born in Mexico and came to the U.S. when she was 1 year old. She is now a junior here at DU and is on the planning committee for the Keeping the Dream Alive conference. We'll then have Margie Thompson, who's an associate professor of international and intercultural communication in the media, film, and journalism studies program here. And she is involved in the new sanctuary movement and has brought a friend and colleague of hers, Anna, who's going to share some of her experience around the sanctuary movement. And last but not least, we'll hear from Tanya Valenzuela, who's a community organizer and activist. She's a native of Mexico who moved to the U.S. with her family when she was just 9 years old. And as an undocumented woman of color, she now attempts to guide the conversation toward positive change with community impact around the migrant community. So with that, I'm not going to take up any more time since we're running long already, and turn it over to Lisa.
Please, Max.
Yeah, you need my help?
No, yeah, totally do. All right. Hi, y'all. It's nice to meet you. My name's Lisa Graybill. Thank you for that kind introduction, Erica, and thank you all for being here. On a snowy night, I thought the chances of much of a turnout were slim, so it's such a pleasure to be able to talk about an issue I care so much about with so many people. Our theme is doing something about it, and that's really what I'll be talking a little bit about tonight. I'm going to focus on litigation because, you know, like if you're a hammer, everything you see is a nail. If you're a lawyer, you see a potential for lawsuits. Certainly not the only way to solve problems, often not the best way to solve problems. And I think you've heard tonight, and we'll hear from many different people using many different tools and strategies to combat what I think many of us see as an inhumane and illegal, really humanitarian crisis that's happening on the border and with these detention centers. I'm focusing on litigation, but again, it's just one of many tools in the box, and in my opinion, the one that should be used as a last resort. So I looked at the program description to think about in thinking about what I would discuss tonight, and the questions that were asked in the description were these two. What can we do as individuals and as a campus and as a community to address the civil and human rights concerns of individuals and families who are being detained and deported? And how can we rewrite these immigration narratives to protect and uphold the values of dignity, justice, and freedom? There are many competing narratives about who the immigrants amongst us are, including the narrative that almost all of us are, in fact, immigrants, just depending on how many generations you go back. But there are competing narratives, and Sean, who spoke to you on the last panel, was actually featured in a story in the Denver Post that covered some of the work that we did in Artesia, and there were some wonderful supportive reactions and people who called DU to see if they could donate money to support the cause, to which, of course, we said yes. But there were also vitriolic, angry, nasty comments. And that's the counter-narrative that we're dealing with. And I think we have to look that squarely in the face and talk about how we're going to address it, whatever the tools are that we're using, whether it's litigation, whether it's social action, whether it's policy advocacy. And ultimately, again, the question is how to take action. So lawsuits tell stories, and trial lawyers especially are storytellers, sometimes long-winded, often very impassioned. Really, in a lawsuit, you're looking at the plaintiff's story versus the defendant's story. Cases are supposed to be litigated in courts of law, but we share a society-wide fascination with how disputes among us get worked out, and that's what happens in the legal arena. Litigation is really a battle of two competing narratives. Who are you going to believe? You see this fictionalized through popular culture. You see tons of movies. The most recent movie I saw that involved a lawsuit was The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch, which is told through flashbacks from when he's been arrested for homosexual conduct. He's was a code breaker in World War II. But I'm sure all of you can think of many movies every year that center around the drama of a case or an investigation. Same thing with books. As a law professor, I'll tell you, the number of students that have told me that they went to law school because they read To Kill a Mockingbird, the list is long. There are many students, and I think that's a good reason to go to law school, because you want to be Atticus Finch, because a book or a narrative or a story moved you about the ways lawyers can work for justice. And then, of course, there are myriad TV shows. My personal favorite is The Good Wife. Coming clean right now, but there's Law and Order of in every dimension. There's 5 of those now. My point is that we work things out through lawsuits and through litigation, and we are fascinated by this public means of resolving disputes and telling stories. And then there are the real life dramas. Probably some of you in this room aren't old enough to remember the O.J. Simpson drama, but more recently, Casey Anthony is a good example. We are captivated socially by these stories of good and bad. Do you believe that Casey Anthony was a good mom who was overextended, or do you believe she was an evil, terrible person? And notice the dichotomy I'm putting up there. It's often a pretty extreme discussion, the way these narratives are told in the media. So whose story is it when you're talking about a lawsuit? What do y'all think? Whose story is being told? I'm really asking. Anyone? I'm having a Ferris Bueller moment here. I see some law students. Whose story? Help me out here. The client's story. Right. Is it just the client's story? Who's helping the client tell his or her story? The lawyer, exactly. And then you also have the community that can become very invested in a particular case or controversy or personality or character that a client's being made out to be. And then finally you have the media, also very invested and often driving community interests. So what can start as seemingly a pretty simple way to resolve a dispute between X and Y can snowball into a much bigger story that can have consequences for the individuals involved, for all the figures who are participating in the legal proceedings, but more broadly than that, big cases can sway the country. When you look back at the aftermath of Brown versus Board of Education, for example, the case that desegregated public schools. Yes, it was a legal holding, but it was also a moment in the civil rights movement and a moment that kicked off the next wave of the civil rights movement. So that case was a Supreme Court decision, but the implications of that case manifested themselves down to the very level of kindergarten. And there was huge social reaction to that, both positive and some very, very negative. So I think a lot about, and I talk to students about how to empower a client, because first and foremost, it is your client's story. And my belief is that as a lawyer, you're entrusted with helping your client tell it. That doesn't mean it becomes your story. And that's a certain perspective on lawyering. There are many, but that's really a client-centered perspective on lawyering. So when I meet you, my goal is to find out what you need and help you figure out how to get that, instead of to tell you what your problem is and tell you how I'm going to fix it. Does that make sense? Like I said, there are a lot of different ways of lawyering, but this is the way that the clinical programs at the University of Denver's Law School really employ to empower a client through litigation instead of disempower a client. If any of you have ever interacted with the legal system as a client, as a witness, my guess is that you may not have found it an empowering experience. And our goal is to do what we can to change that a little bit. So in my ideal universe of client relations, a lawyer advises and explains to the client the implications of a certain action for his or her case. If you do this, this is what I think is most likely to happen. If you leave the country and you don't have status and you're caught coming back, I think it's most likely that if you're caught, you're going to be placed in proceedings. So I'm not telling you whether to do it or not do it. I'm just letting you know what I think will probably happen. I also think it's a lawyer's job to look at the implications for the client's broader lives. Our clients don't just come to us with a legal problem, they come to us with their whole entire life. And if you have someone who's saying they've experienced a grave injustice, but they're afraid to proceed in litigation, even if I think you've got the greatest case I've ever heard of, and as an ACLU lawyer, we were certainly taught to like headlines. So I'm dying to write a press release about this terrible thing that happened to you because I think I can galvanize a movement around it. If you don't want to tell your story, that's your right, if you're afraid. If you're afraid that if you tell your story, it will come out that you were raped and your husband doesn't know that and you don't ever want him to, that's your right. Even if I think it will help your case to tell the judge that. At the end of the day, it's the client's decision as to what parts of his or her story he or she wants to share with the court and make part of his or her legal case. And I think it's a lawyer's obligation to give clients a full sense of the consequences, full disclosure on what could happen, both legally and in terms of social response to their stories if they choose to tell them. And then it's the client's job to decide, to ask questions, to be a partner in their case, but to work together. So shifting a little bit to family detention. I think you already have a little bit of a sense of the history of family detention. I really just want to get to this graph because I think it shows you how, along with the other slides you've seen that showed low, growing, giant, you see here that we had low family detention, growing family detention, sudden explosion of family detention, literally just in the last 8 months. This exponential increase in the number of families being detained. We've already talked quite a bit about who the families are in detention. I do want to stop and point out to all of us the positives and minuses of talking about good immigrants. When we talk about refugees and asylum seekers, and as a litigator, I love representing cute little kids. But who are we leaving behind? Who are we leaving out? Does someone who comes here out of desperate economic necessity, are they no longer a good immigrant who's entitled to our support and the protection of the law? What about people who come here and pick up a DUI? Do they become a bad immigrant? Do we leave them in the cold? Sometimes I think when we focus on families, for very good reasons, we can leave out the rest of the community in a way that's divisive and isolating. So I think we have to be mindful of that. These are a couple slides just showing you where the families in Texas are, not as remote as Artesia, still pretty darn remote. San Antonio up there in the middle is my hometown. Carnes and Artesia are each about an hour away. Here's how advocates are fighting family detention, and there are a bunch of different tools. One is impact litigation, big case, usually brought on behalf of a bunch of people trying to change a law or policy for everybody. Brown is a good example. Then there's individual representation, where you're telling your client's story and trying to get your client relief. There's also policy reform. There's what DU's Immigrants' Rights Lab did in terms of tweeting live from the courtroom to try to get the word out about how these cases were going. And there's community organizing and protesting, and I think those are all great tools. I'm not going to explain the difference between individual representation and impact litigation, but I want to take 1 second, which is probably going to take me over my time. I'm telling you right now, Eric, I'm going to stop looking at you because I know you're going to be holding up the sign. I want to show you, as long as we're connected to the internet, the way the organization I used to work for told the story of the last big family detention litigation case. We put up letters that the children wrote. I hope you can see that. The first one was by a 10-year-old, actually Canadian citizen child who with his Iraqi parents was picked up when the plane they were fleeing their home country on got diverted and landed in Puerto Rico because somebody on the plane had a heart attack. Everybody was taken off, his parents' documents were discovered to be false, and they were all landed in Hutto. And he wrote a letter to the Canadian Prime Minister saying, I don't want to stay in this jail. I'm only 9 years old. I want to go to my school in Canada. I'm sleeping beside a wall. Please give visas for my family. This place isn't good. There are also a number of drawings that children drew really while we were interviewing their parents about, ooh, I don't know if you can see that or not. Oops, I just drove away from that by accident. But while we were talking to the parents about their cases, we often gave the kids crayons to draw with, and it was amazing the things that they drew. And you see some of those examples right there. That's a child drew, help, I hate this place. That's a little girl who drew herself with a broken heart. That is an American flag that says, please help us. And that's a kid in jail. The folks themselves were the most powerful storytellers, and what we tried to do was help give them a forum. I'm not going to show this video, but I really, really want to. It's about 2 minutes long, and it features families talking about what it was like while they were detained. I think in this case, the ACLU did a good job of taking our clients' stories and, with their consent, using their own words to spread the information about why family detention was so intolerable and inhumane. And people responded, and ultimately that detention center was closed, unfortunately. We have the ones that have recently opened. And the last slide, if I can go back to it, can you help me? We'll just tell you a little bit about what we're doing now. Please go to the very last one. So this is what students have done. We went to Artesia last fall and worked with individuals, and we're going back to Carnes and Dilley over spring break with some social work students and some law students to provide representation for women there. Most importantly, what can you do? You can come to the Immigration conference that Cessa already told you about. There will be a panel on family detention. You can support the students who are going to Carnes and Dilley over spring break. You can write letters to your congressional representatives telling them you don't support family detention. That's pretty powerful, especially if enough people do it. And you can participate in protests. I believe in taking things to the street. The Detention Watch Network is a great resource. They coordinate protests, and they'll be staging a big one in Dilley in May. In case you feel like a road trip to Texas, I can tell you all about it and where to eat, because San Antonio is my hometown. Thank you very much for indulging me.
So hi everybody, my name is Cynthia and I am a student here at DU. I'm in my third year. I'm an accounting major, and yeah. So I'll start telling you a little bit about myself and my story and everything, how I became really involved with the undocumented community, which is kind of ironic because I am undocumented, so so I came to the US when I was 1 year old, so I came in 1995. I came into the Denver Public School, so I went to Kepner Middle School and Lincoln High School, and then I went to 2 elementary schools. I really kind of came through to being undocumented in 8th grade when all my friends were traveling to Europe with a program called KEEP. So they traveled to Europe, and I had to stay behind because I risked the troubles of not being able to get back into the country once we came back. So this is when I really realized, what it meant to be undocumented and how I was going to be left behind from all my friends who were citizens and who had the privilege of traveling wherever they wanted to at whatever time they wanted to. So that's really when I realized, what it was going to mean to me to be undocumented. And in high school, my junior year, my dad got deported, and oh God, I don't want to cry. My dad got deported, and then in 2011, my mom decided to leave with my 3 younger siblings, and I decided to stay because I was almost done with high school, and I decided that it was, gonna be a waste of my time if I went to Mexico when I had already been in school here, and everything I've learned was in English, so I couldn't go back to Mexico and do everything in Spanish that I only knew in English. So I decided to stay behind. I shouldn't have looked. But the pictures, my parents and my siblings. I didn't want to cry, God. So then, DU at the time was the most affordable for me when I was deciding to come to DU, or what school to choose. So one of the scholarships that I got was the Booster Foundation. I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but they're through Cecil. And so I decided because I got the scholarship, I was able to afford more of DU than I was ever to afford a public university, because at the time the asset bill hadn't passed, so I had to pay the same out-of-state tuition instead of the regular in-state tuition. So DU was more affordable, which is crazy, as all these, all students, how expensive it is. So I was privileged enough to get this scholarship and be able to attend DU. And then DACA passed in the summer of me coming into DU, or, Obama passed an executive action to get this. So I applied. It took me a while to apply. I don't know why. But I applied and then I got it, and I was able to, start working on campus, not with work study because I'm still not eligible for federal financial aid. Thankfully, a lot of offices here on campus have budgets that are able to pay me from their budgets instead of work study. So I've been, very lucky to have people who are willing to help me. So that's a little bit about myself. And ever since, I've really taken my undocumented identity as one of the biggest identities that I choose to always tell people about, just because I feel like I now that I'm in college and I have this level of education, I have the privilege of not being afraid to say who I am and not have to hide behind the shadows. So through PUCSA, I met a lot of people, and I got involved with Together Colorado first, and then Keeping the Dream Alive came into my life, and I decided that I would love to, put this on. And what the Keeping the Dream Alive conference is, I don't know, maybe a lot of you have heard about it because it has been hosted at DU for at least the 2 years that I've been on the planning committee. And it's basically a conference that is geared towards the teachers and the counselors of these undocumented students. And it's usually hosted in the fall of every year, so we're starting to plan the conference for October probably of this coming up this year. And it's, like I said, it's been hosted here at DU. It was started by high school students at Bruce Randolph High School in the Swansea community area. And it was really an opportunity for us to, the first year that I got involved by facilitating a Dreamers panel, where I, had a few other friends who I know who are undocumented, and I had them come and talk to the teachers and really tell them like what our lives look like and what we have to go through to be here and whatnot. So I really got involved with that, and then for this past conference, I facilitated the lunch panel, and I also helped put together the first annual Dreamers Day. This was through my summer internship, which is through Inspire, who's a new nonprofit organization. You might have heard of it, you might have not. It's fairly new. So on September 19th, we were able to bring over 150 high school students from 6 different districts in Colorado and 20 different high schools who, are losing hope because they think that they're not able to achieve what they want to achieve. And for me, it was really important to get involved with undocumented students because I was in their shoes and I understood what they were going through and what they're gonna face in the future. So this is like my main focus. This is what I want to do. I want to work with these undocumented students and help them, and hopefully serve as a model that you can do it if you set yourself up for it. And I also, through my internship, I was able to create a scholarship guide for undocumented students. And then when I was in high school and I was trying to look for scholarships to apply for, literally, I'm not kidding you, it was like 2 pages, a total of 12 scholarships that I could apply for. And when I was thinking about this and when I was doing research for more scholarships of what that students could qualify, undocumented students could qualify for, I was like, this is great because I know what it was like to struggle. And I found over 60 scholarships that undocumented students are now able to apply for. And it's been distributed all over Colorado. I constantly get emails saying like, thank you for this. And it's just really great to know that this something that I put a lot of work and effort into is really getting to help a lot of students that are in the same shoes that I once were. And then now moving forward, I am working on creating a mentorship program for high school students. Right now it's just focused in DPS just because there's a lot of us. So I'm just focusing right now and especially Lincoln where I went and just the surrounding schools around here. So I'm fairly new. I'm developing it. I'm trying to come up with curriculum and If you know any other undocumented students who might be interested in participating and being a mentor for this program, you can talk to me after and send them my way, because I need a lot of them. And yeah, and then this just, a few of the scholarships that were able to come up. And yeah.
I'm Margie Thompson, and I'm very pleased to be here and want to thank you all for coming. I have worked for 20 years as a multicultural and international journalist and also a scholar, and most of my work has been focused in Central America and South America as well as the Caribbean. And the focus, I've worked with women's and feminist media out of Central America, and our focus has been focusing on the voices of women, amplifying the voices of women, and hearing about women's perspectives on all issues. But when I ask my students, tell me about women from Nicaragua, from Guatemala, from Panama, and so on, they don't really know. They can't really say anything, or what they say is really the stereotypes that women in these countries or immigrant women here from these countries are very passive, that they're victims, that they're, I even heard, that they really, they're victims of machismo or victims of their situation and so on. But I want to focus on how this really isn't true, that the women are speaking out. And we've heard from one activist here today, and going to hear also from Ana Salsameda, that women really are very active in the resistance and really have strategies of survival that they're working with all of the families and in the movement. This is a picture of a vigil that takes place every month, if you're interested, out in Aurora at the GEO Detention Center, GEO being a big corporation that runs the detention center. And if you notice, the women, there was a larger crowd, but the women in the picture are primarily women who speak Spanish. And so they are there. They are out in public. They are speaking out. And the idea is to speak out and make a lot of noise so that the detainees inside know that people have not forgotten them. But you also see the women are here, and they brought their kids who are playing on the sidewalk. In my interviews with women from the whole region, but also really all over the world, I've learned that women are often the backbone of families and communities, and that they all have strategies of survival. And they're often, of course, working with their families, but they're often working behind the scenes and taking a lead role in social and political movements, in resistance actions, and so on. But so much of this is left out of the media. And so much of it other people from elsewhere don't know about. So these are, the one picture is of the Nabi and Buglé, and these women are in Panama. They're indigenous women, and they led a protest last year where they shut down the Pan American Highway. And the stereotype is that indigenous women are quiet in the background and so on, but in this particular group, it's not true, and they are coming forward more. The other two pictures are of Honduras, where I went after the military coup, and the women were very much out front. So the woman in red, they called her the abuela de la resistencia. She was the grandmother of the resistance, and she was out every single day when they had daily marches after the coup, and she had her megaphone. You can see she's right in the faces of these riot police. And then at the bottom is a group of young women who called themselves the Feminists in Resistance. And they were out with their green banners, which they passed around. They were right out front, so they were often the targets of police for beatings and arrests and so on. As you can see, women here are really very much out front. And when it comes to immigrant women, there's a lot of research that looks at the impact of deportation and detention on women, but I've found so much of it when they talk about women, yes, it's extremely difficult and hardships and so on, but again, I feel like I often see them described as victims. And one study I read talked about that women are the silent victims of the broken deportation system. And certainly they are victims, but they also are very much out front. So this is Jeanette Vizquera. We heard her story, but I also want to really emphasize that she is an activist. She was always taking action. She was always strategizing on behalf of her family, but also with other communities. She's in constant communication with other undocumented women and families. Her phone is always ringing, and she works with immigrant rights groups such as American Friends Service Committee and CIRC, the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition, as well as the New Sanctuary Movement, which I'll talk about in a minute. So here is Jeanette out in a march downtown Denver with her kids. The little one in the front, it says, "Please don't deport my mother." On the right is the Romero Theater Group, which, if you don't know about them, are really fabulous theater troupe. And they have performed the stories of Jeanette Vizquera, other stories, as well as Ana Sosameda and her husband Arturo Hernandez, who's in sanctuary now. So this is reenacting her story. And then at the bottom is Suri. This is Jeanette's youngest, who's holding up a poster of her family. So even the kids are often very much out front. The children of Jeanette, the children of another woman I'll talk about, and also with Ana Sosameda, the two girls, they are becoming activists and they are setting out front. They've made trips to Washington, D.C., they speak in press conferences, they speak to members of Congress and so on. So again, the kids who, as we've heard, there's a devastating impact, but the kids are right out there in front as well. This is Lupe Lopez, and I've interviewed, she lives here in Denver, and I've interviewed her, and she's talked about how she and her husband were picked up about 2 years ago by the police and spent time in the detention center and are now facing deportation. And she talked about how traumatized her kids have been about all of this, and she talked about the fear of the knock on the door in the day or the night. And I have interviewed women from Nicaragua about what it was like in the dictatorships before the Sandinista revolution, who talked about the knock on the door in the middle of the night. And they never knew when Somoza's guards were going to arrive and drag people out and kill everyone and so on and disappear them. And likewise, I've heard it in Guatemala, I've heard it in Honduras. So I ask you, what's it like when we hear women today talking about their kids being terrified of the knock on the door? Lupe, likewise, is struggling, her children are struggling and so on, but she is also an activist. She's out front in many protests, many rallies. Here is one of the pictures is of she and her family. They have 4 children who were born here in the United States, and the man on the left is her husband. And then the picture on the top right is Jeanette Vizquera and also Lupe, and they spoke at the launching of the New Sanctuary Movement here in Denver. And then at the bottom, this is the vigil, one of the vigils out at the detention center, and the 2 little girls on the right are Lupe's daughters, and the one on the left is Jeanette's oldest daughter, Luna, and they were leading the march and shouting the chants, and they were right out front of this vigil. And Ana Sosameda, I'm going to turn it over to her soon here to have her tell your story. Her story of she and her husband and struggling against her husband's deportation. But Ana has also, she was not an activist before, neither was Arturo, but Ana, her husband Arturo, is always giving talks to the media and talking to a lot of groups and congresspeople if they go to the church basement at the First Unitarian Society of Denver. But Ana has become the public face of the family out in front. And so the picture, the top left that says "Keep Arturo Home," this was taken last week when Arturo's application to reopen his deportation case was denied, and Ana was out there right out front and speaking on his behalf. The picture with the poster, this is the family. You can see Arturo and Ana and their 2 daughters, and Ana is at the press conference. And then this is Ana. I've seen her a number of times now speaking to the media. So I'd like to turn it over to Ana and then wrap it up. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Ana Sosameda. I will briefly tell you the story about my family. I'm the wife of Arturo Hernandez Garcia. Right now, he is a refugee in sanctuary, and today it'll be 3 months. We came to the United States in 1999. We've been here for 15 years. We have two girls. Back in 2010, my husband Arturo had a problem at work. He has a small company, and someone accused him unfairly for threatening him. He called the cops. He was arrested without doing any kind of research. He was in jail for about a month. They wanted him to claim as guilty, and he said no. So he started to go to trial, and there were 12 juries, and then he was declared not guilty. Later on, he was held by migration, and he was arrested for 15 days. He paid his bond, and then he started his process to fight immigration. He was denied everything. The petition was denied. October the 21st, he was deported, and he had to take sanctuary. And then it's been submitted to 2 states, and it's been denied. And just like with Jeanette, we're looking to have an extension for this deportation. Let's hope that it'll be granted. That's all. It's just a summary.
So if you want more information, we are passing around the sign-up sheet and also this idea of forming an activist group of students who want to get more involved. Also, if you do want more information about any of the cases of Jeanette and also Arturo Hernandez and Ana, I wanted to mention the new sanctuary movement is a movement here in Denver that's modeled after the sanctuary movement that took place here in the 80s and 90s. As Sean talked about, and so on about El Salvador, that there were cases in the 80s and 90s where people were fleeing war, such as in El Salvador, coming to the United States and applying for asylum. But the cases took a long time, and they were threatened with deportation back to the war, where they would likely be killed. So a number of churches opened their doors and said, in the name of their mission, spiritual mission and mission for peace and so on, that they were wanting to give safe space to a number of immigrants, and that's been reactivated today. Right now there's a Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition, which is comprised of 5 churches in the area, and the First Unitarian Society of Denver is the one of the 5 that has a space that Jeanette talked about, and Arturo is living there in the basement. And he cannot go outside or he'd be arrested, but the chances of immigration or Homeland Security or the police coming in is very, very low, because for these agencies, it's really about image and branding, and it wouldn't look so good if they went in and arrested an immigrant in a church. So if you are interested, there's a lot happening. What Jeanette talked about, and Ana, there are some immediate calls to action by the AFSC and CERC for their 2 cases where they're asking people to make phone calls to the head of ICE. They're asking people to call Congress and so on, because these are things that are happening today. So it's an urgent action on behalf of these cases. There's a 3rd case of a man who has 4 children and another godson who lives with him, who's lived here 20 years, and they fought to avoid his deportation, and he was deported yesterday. So they're also fighting to get his case reconsidered to bring him back, because his wife and the kids now have to figure out how are they going to survive without the breadwinner.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tanya Valenzuela. I am specifically nervous today. I'm usually really good at getting up and speaking. I've done it for the past few years. But today is the first time the film that I'm featuring will be presented to a group of people that I don't know at all. So I've scribbled all over my notes, so bear with me. I wanted to be part of this panel because I wanted to hear how we are planning on rewriting these immigrant narratives. I know whose story has been told because I've heard it growing up. I've heard, I've been called a wetback, an illegal, and many other names you could imagine. And that is the primary narrative. And I cringe every time I hear illegal because it is an insult and a reference to my person. And my effort in speaking out and sharing my story has always been to humanize this topic. We have always, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is, if you go to the website, it will say it right there. It's focused on removing people that are a threat to the community. And we have created this this idea of the good immigrant, of the dreamer, the undocumented student who's able to go against all odds and get a college education. And we have heard about the good immigrant who pay taxes and who do everything by the books as much as they can, being undocumented. And I think it is time to rewrite that narrative because we are here, we're part of this community, and we're human, therefore not perfect. And I started working with the community and volunteering when I was in college. I was really, while going to school, I was really angry and tired of sitting in class and, being given a lecture, a really good lecture about a really good topic. And I had to sit there and think about how I was going to pay for the next semester because I couldn't get any loans, because I couldn't get any scholarships. And thinking about how just going to school every day was me being being threatened because at any time that I got behind a wheel, I could be stopped by a police officer, and I could be detained, and I could be deported, and I could be separated from my family. And it got to a moment in 2009 when my mom was a victim of fraud and was put in removal proceedings. And I couldn't understand how I could still sit in that classroom knowing that my mom was going to be ripped away from me in a few months and still try to get an education when I had to be thinking about what I would do if I'd go back with her, if I would keep my brother and sister so they could continue their schooling here in the language that they learned as children. And it was then where I started going and reaching out to community organizations and see what work was being done, and started bringing. I graduated from Regis University, and I brought to Regis the movement of immigration, information, education, and from there I saw at that time the Dreamer movement was the first positive movement on immigration out there, and that was the main focus. And to me, it was great because I qualified under the DREAM Act. I was a dreamer. But to me, it was more important to expand the narrative to include my mother, to include a person who was not the good immigrant. ICE is focused on removing people who are a threat to a community. My mother, Arturo, Janet, and all the other people who I've worked on cases locally are not a threat to the community. And I have always used testimonial as a tool of empowerment and healing. And that is why I have always been able to share my story, because every time I speak, I share, I get behind a camera and let people film me, I am healing, I am growing, and I am a little bit closer to talking to somebody else about immigration in a human way. I really like a quote that really gets me through the day. It's actually my signature or my email if you ever email with me, but it's by Bell Hooks, and it's moving from silence into speech is for the oppressed, the colonized, the exploited, and those who stand side by side, a gesture of defiance that heals, that makes new life and new growth possible. And that is what rewriting stories is to allow for people who are going through the oppression speak. It is allowing and encouraging, because it's not easy to be up here. And it's encouraging people like the two awesome women that were here before me, to be able to share what their life has been. And it's something that I organize with. I've created, because not all, there's amazing work that organizations are doing, but they're not doing it all. So if you really want to do something and you can find it under an organization, that's great. I really call people into action to go volunteer, to make those awesome signs that I've been in rooms for hours making, because they make the movement look great. And when media comes, that's what the message comes through. But I also encourage people to come up with their own ideas. And as I said, organizations don't always have what we need. And I've worked with a lot of people in creating those things. Colorado is the first state to have people who are under deportation leading the fight to stop their own deportation, like Janet and Arturo. Here in the room, I mentioned them, but there's a ton of other people. The Fighting Deportations has been a movement that has grown with youth, and youth doing the work and stopping the deportations of their community members. But it is, I believe Colorado is the first state where we facilitated people who are going through deportations, who are mainly monolingual speakers, to fight their own deportations, and that is very, very empowering for them. And that's one of my call to actions, is to ask you all to become involved in signing those petitions that are going around or that are shared to you on social media, is to make those phone calls. The phone calls are really important. They let ICE know that there's a community behind this person that's willing to mobilize if this person is removed from the country. And very importantly, attend the protest. It may not seem like a huge deal, but it is, because the more people out there, the more newsworthy a case is. And the more newsworthy the case is, the more media we get. The more media we get, the more people know about this person. And ICE doesn't want to be put as the bad guy. Their motto is to remove people who are a threat to the community. When we show them through petitions, through pictures, that the person is not a threat, and they're still removing them, then they become the bad guy, and they really don't want that bad media on them. I also call people to get involved, or at least be aware of what's going on politically in the state. I was a part of the driver's license movement that started about 3-4 years ago. And I am really proud to say that now an undocumented person with lots and lots of hurdles can get an appointment at DMV and get a driver's license. And I am no longer afraid to drive here and be able to speak with you all. When in the past, it was the thought of thinking that, yes, I want to do this, but how am I going to get there? What if I get stopped? I have been stopped. I have been questioned about my identity, and it's really a shame. And I'm really happy to know that parents are able to drive their kids to school and go to other events. So I really encourage people. That movement, by the way, was led by immigrant folks, undocumented and documented. It wasn't an effort by an organization. And that's what I mean when people can create their own work to do in the community. There's a few other laws that are anti-immigrant that passed in 2006 that you all should research and get working on, because we want to repeal them. Because immigration reform hasn't passed. And if it passes, it excludes a lot of folks, including some of my friends and parents. So I think the best strategy as a call to action is to start locally and work locally. And finally, I want to invite you all to stay for the screening of the premiere of the film. The film is a representation of the human side of immigration and the reality of a lot of immigrant families here in the United States. It is me behind the camera, but it is not me. It is thousands and millions of other people out there in other states who are fighting the same fight to be human in the eyes of all of you. Thank you.
No further comments. Let's thank our panelists one more time.